I was fortunate enough to begin my career at a time when the independent field was growing, so it was partially being in the right place at the right time. And the other thing I would say is I really worked. I worked very, very hard. People think of directing a film as a glamorous thing, and to a certain extent it is, but it is also very hard work. I was a reader at 20th Century Fox, and I knew they were looking for a Western for Gregory Peck, who was under contract there. And I read a script called The Big Gun, which I thought was a very good Western, and I wrote some comments and suggestions as to how it might be improved. The picture became The Gunfighter, which is more or less of a classic Western, and the story editor got a bonus for the comments I made.
5 Guns West, 5 condemned men who traded a sentence to die for 1,000-to-1 chance to live.
Training on the job was pretty wild because I didn't know anything about making motion pictures at all, and on the very first film, I was the truck driver. I was the producer truck driver, and I remember a representative of the Teamsters came out, which they're very efficient on this sort of thing, and they said, who's the truck driver on this film? And I said, I am. And he said, are you the producer? And I said, yes. He said, you're a producer and truck driver? And I said, it's the most efficient way to go. I can drive the truck out. No, I might as well don't need to hire somebody to drive a truck. And actually, the Teamsters are noted for and are really tough. But he laughed. And he said, all right, Roger, you're going to be an honorary Teamster for this picture, but you'll be signed with the Teamsters on your next picture, won't you? And I said, absolutely. The Fast and the Furious was the second picture I produced. It was a sports car racing picture called The Fast and the Furious. The picture was successful, and then Neil Moritz at Universal had a car chase film, and he didn't like the title. And his father had actually worked at American International, and Neil was having dinner with his father, and his father said, you know, Roger made a picture called The Fast and the Furious. What do you think of that title? And Neil said, you know, I think that's a good title. So Neil and I had lunch, and I sold him the title. I had no idea what was going to happen.
See a man fight against supernatural forces for the girl he loves. See a beast with 1,000,000 eyes control a ship from outer space. One of the most fantastic terror thrills the screen has ever brought you.
It may be my engineering background, but I determined right from the beginning that I had to have scripts, or scripts that I wrote, that fit the budget. There's no point in writing a scene where 10,000 Indians charge over the hill if you've only got a $50,000 budget. So I wrote the scripts to fit the budget. So I did not have a problem on the set shooting that. That was one of the key things that I just sort of instinctively did.
Beware, the creature from the haunted sea.
My first company was Palo Alto Productions. I couldn't think of a name, and I thought, well, I went to school in Palo Alto, I'll call it Palo Alto Productions. And then there was something in the tax laws that individual companies paid a smaller tax because if you had, let us say, $100, and all of that $100 went into one company. But if you had 4 companies, each company made $25 and were in a low tax bracket. So simply, I figured if I started with Palo Alto, I'll keep going. I went to Santa Cruz, San Jose, Los Altos, all the towns on the San Francisco Peninsula.
What can we do, Rick?
My brother believed the Bible gave strength and revealed a plan for everything.
And I hope I find it before I lose my mind.
The Day the World Ended was my second picture. Five Guns West was the first. I was starting to learn a little bit more, but for me, each film was a learning process. Having never gone to film school, making films was my film school. So I took what I learned from the first film and tried to apply it to the second film. And specifically, I worked more with the actors in pre-shooting rehearsal because I didn't want to come on the set and do a lot of rehearsal on the set while the crew is standing by. It seemed more efficient just to go into an empty set before shooting and rehearse before shooting. That then required just a little bit of adjustment, so I was able to work faster with the actors, and I learned the importance of sketching my shots. I tried to sketch 100% of my shots, and the directors that started with me, I always say, you've got to sketch 100% of your shots. Neither I nor they ever did 100%. We'd get up to about 70, 80% and figure, well, I can figure the rest out on the set, except for one person. Marty Scorsese sketched every shot. And I figured, okay, here's a guy who is really dedicated.
You and me, you said. But it's her you're thinking of, you rotten liar.
So I'm a liar.
Any friend you had in the world was me. Anyone who loved you was me. You cheap hood.
That's for you, lover. Now leave me alone.
We started with the idea that atomic warfare and nuclear fallout has pretty much eliminated the human race. A lot of people had that idea. A number of films were made on that basis. But knowing this was kind of a big subject matter, I determined that we would just take a small number of people who were isolated so that I could shoot very tight and fit the budget. It just seemed to me that we were in dangerous times. I was not the only one who feared the possibility of nuclear devastation. It was definitely something to consider.
I will tell you something.
What?
In a little while, all of you will be dead. You think I'm crazy, don't you?
I don't know.
I've always liked science fiction films, and if you were to start after the bomb has exploded, you were really in a science fiction futuristic world. I remember one time I came into a nightclub on the Sunset Strip, and Mort Saul, who was a friend of mine, a very good comedian, looked up and saw me come in, and he said, "Hey, Roger, there's something I always wanted to ask you. After we explode an atomic bomb, it always destroys a lot of people, but why does the monster always want to destroy the Golden Gate Bridge?" On the films that I was financing, I came up with my titles. On the films I was making for American International, Jim Nicholson and I worked together on the titles. As a matter of fact, I directed 4 Westerns, and you can see my thought of Westerns and Jim Nicholson's thought. On the 2 films that were financed by AIP, we had Jim's titles, and they were Apache Woman and Oklahoma Woman. So you saw his thinking. On the 2 Westerns that I financed myself, they were Five Guns West and Gunslinger. So you could see exactly where we were going.
Come, enjoy yourself. Where the hilarious enjoy the horrifying. In A Bucket of Blood.
I was aware that with bigger budgets, I could make bigger production value films, higher possibly better actors, or at least actors with better names, but I preferred to be able to control the film myself, and frankly, I didn't have that much money to finance the films. Most of those little films at the beginning were costing $50,000, $60,000.
See their strictly taboo underwater romance. See a young girl fight a killer shark. See she-gods of Shark Reef in beautiful color.
What made American International work was, I think, the combination of Jim and Sam. Jim had been a theater operator and understood which films had performed best for him in theaters, and he really handled the creative end of it. Sam was a lawyer, and he took care of the business end. So it was a very good partnership. There was a demarcation of authority. They both understood it, and everybody who worked with them understood it.
The future come to life today. The fantastic story of Project Sigma, Earth's first manned satellite for the invasion of outer space.
In retrospect, a lot of it was crazy. I was doing things that I didn't know whether or not I could do it, but I just thought, I can do this. On the other hand, the first film I directed, I had produced 2 films, and I saw what the directors were doing, and I simply felt, I can do that. I don't have to hire a director. But then on the first day of shooting, and I thought I had everything organized, I was so nervous that I didn't have lunch for the first 2 or 3 days. During lunchtime, we were shooting out at Corrigan's Ranch. I just laid down on the ground and rested during lunch and tried to pull myself together for the afternoon's work.
I hope you enjoyed your dancing. You'll be first prize if you don't stay inside.
I'm not afraid of you.
And I'm afraid of you.
The way I worked was this. It started with my very first film. I hired a crew, and when the film was finished, I made a list of everybody who was on the crew and rated them as the guys I definitely wanted back for my next picture, the guys I knew I did not want back for the next picture, and the guys who were okay, and if I couldn't find anybody better, I would go with them. I did this for 3 or 4 or 5 films in a row, each time hiring back the best. So by the 4th or 5th picture, I had a crew that had worked with me, and every one of them had been really outstanding in their job. As a matter of fact, they took pride themselves. They were called the Corman crew. When I wasn't working, other independents in the low-budget field would just call up and get the Corman crew.
I'm going to torture you, Isabella. I'm going to make you suffer for your faithlessness to me. You harlot!
The same concept with the writer. I would bring back writers that I liked, that I worked with very much. Bob Towne, matter of fact, a couple of guys were Academy Award winners. Bob Towne was, he won, I think, for Chinatown, and Bob Campbell, I think, was the youngest screenwriter ever to get an Academy Award. It was for, I think, A Man with a Thousand Faces. I didn't really have to explain this. Everybody knew it because I had a team that went from picture to picture, and they knew exactly what, not I would say exactly, more or less exactly what I was doing.
My baby can handle a Tommy gun like most men can't even handle an automatic. Machine Gun Kelly's my little baby. Best gun of them all.
American International wanted a gangster film, and I was on such good terms with them. This is why I stayed with the independents. We didn't even have a contract. The contract was drawn up after I made the film, and they just said, we'd like to have a gangster film, and I could make anything I wanted. I did a little research, and I found that Machine Gun Kelly, who was the FBI, had a list of those days, public enemy #1. When he was finally captured, he was hiding out in a mountain cabin, and they called on him to surrender, or they were going to come in and raid him, and he surrendered. And when the head of the police, or FBI, whatever it was, outside said, "Kelly, we didn't expect you to surrender. We thought you were going to fight to the end. Why didn't you?" And he said, "I thought you might kill me." And I based the whole picture on Kelly, in his own mind, was not the tough guy people thought. There's no way he was going to get into a fight where he was going to lose. He only used that machine gun when the odds were with him. And that was the basis of the film. And it made Charlie Bronson a star. For some reason, the new wave, Nouvelle Vague directors liked the film in Paris. And when I was shooting one of the Edgar Allan Poe films, they arranged me to come over to Paris, and I was interviewed by Positif and Cahiers de Cinema. That film got some major reviews, and it made Charlie a star the same way Clint Eastwood became a star. They went to Europe and became European stars, and then came back to the United States as international stars.
He's going to kill me!
Stay there, I'm on my way.
I can't stay.
We were all working in a similar way. If I differed from some of the others, it was that I was trying to get some additional thoughts into what were essentially B pictures that the others weren't. On the other hand, there was Bill Castle, who was a good friend of mine, and he had a whole different way of going, and he was great. At one time, he wired the seats in a theater for a horror film, and the manager would come out and say, "If anybody is shocked by the horror here, we have nurses in the lobby to take care of you, so try to make your way out to the lobby and the nurses will treat you." The nurses, of course, were the ushers. And another time, he had a ghost come up on a wire from above the screen, and I just loved those gimmicks that he did.
You were alone with a white girl in the basement of the school, but you didn't try to do anything. Is that what you expect us to believe, nigger? Well, speak up!
I mentioned earlier the informed guess. That comes from my work as an engineer. Our senior year at Stanford, Dr. Terman, who went on to great fame for being part of the origin of the Silicon Valley, brought all the graduating seniors together, and he talked about various things engineers were going to do. And he said, there will be some problems you're given, and you know exactly what to do. There'll be other problems you're given, and you don't have enough information, and you have to say, "I don't know, I cannot answer this question." In the middle are questions that you have a general idea, but you're not certain. And he said, I call that the informed guess. You take what you've learned, and you think this will probably work. And that is the mark of the good engineer who can do that. And to a large extent, that applied to my films. They were all informed guesses.
That's the best I can do.
More! More!
But I'm already anemic.
Feed me more!
And for Little Shop of Horrors, it was a creative challenge, it was a business risk, it was also kind of a joke. We were just fooling around. And one of the good things was that the crew, I had a regular crew that worked with me, and everybody knew this was a comedy horror film with a zero budget. I think it was $30,000. And the actors were improvising, and the crew was laughing. And I've always felt that there's an atmosphere on the set that actually imposes itself on the film itself. What success I may have had was due to the fact that I was making commercially oriented films, but I was trying to put something in them. If it was an action picture, I tried to put some thought, some concept, some theme integrated into the action, so there was a little bit more. Just as I mentioned Machine Gun Kelly, it was more a character study of Kelly than straight Kelly shooting the machine gun.
Where is she? Where is she? You buried your own sister alive?
I did. But she's dead now.
It's true that many, if not most of my films have something to do with the inevitability of death, but that's only a portion of it. It is really what happens before that, how you make sense out of the world, what you can think of as the world's meaning, if there is a meaning, knowing that eventually you're going to die anyway, but how do you deal with this, and how do you live knowing that you're going to be dust eventually? What can you do? How do you interpret it? I discussed it many times with screenwriters. A number of them, particularly Bob Campbell and Dick Matheson, shared some of my beliefs.
Lord Satan, send me a demon, so I may know I'm to be your wife.
I was always trying to do something that was interesting to me, but I also was aware that motion picture business, the motion picture business, and that's why they call it the motion picture business, is a combination of both art and commerce.
1943, somewhere in Nazi-occupied territory, are 5 men, misfits from the 4 corners of the world, the strangest 5, with nothing in common but their incredible daring.
On most of the films, I would write a 1 or 2 page outline, a very loose outline, then show it to the writer, and then discuss how it would be developed into the screenplay. I was making films so fast that I didn't have time to write. As a matter of fact, I remember on one film, I was shooting this picture during the day. During lunchtime, I was casting the next picture, and in the evening, I was cutting the previous picture. And I remember I went to bed and I thought, I have to sleep fast. And I thought, wait a minute, that's an insane thought. And I then decided I've got to slow down a little bit.
My chair.
There were a number of Poe films that I was thinking of making. I never really intended to make a series of Poe films. I simply wanted to make The Fall of the House of Usher. When it was successful, they asked me to make another, and I chose The Pit and the Pendulum, and I more or less went down the line of what I thought were his most important works. I think I made 6 or 7 Poe films. They wanted me to make more, and I felt I was starting to repeat myself. And I said, I don't want to make any more Poe films. I hired somebody to make some Poe films. After that, I said, I want to go into the street and shoot in reality rather than in the studio, and that's what led to The Wild Angels, the Hell's Angels picture.
Yeah, we don't want nobody telling us what to do. We don't want nobody pushing us around.
Just what is it that you want to do?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded. Oh, no, preach. Not children of God, but hell's angels.
I discovered the importance of distribution when I made a picture called The Wild Angels, which was about the Hell's Angels motorcycle gang. I was told it was the highest grossing low-budget picture ever made and always had a percentage of the profits. And when I looked at the distribution reports, it was clear they were not accurate. And I called them and I said, I'm going to sue you guys. I know these figures aren't right. And what really bothered me was they had been honest all the way. We were all friends. But the grosses on that picture were so big they couldn't resist stealing part of the money. We settled it. We made another film. My follow-up film was The Trip, again with Peter Fonda, but this time Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, and written by Jack Nicholson. Jack was writing scripts for me. His career wasn't going anywhere as an actor. And The Trip was another big winner, and they cheated me again.
The wildest of pleasures possess you.
1 year later, I started my own distribution company.
Here we stand in the new world. We're gonna make it better. Young enough to start a new way of living. Can't you feel it getting together?
Most of my films have been independent films, but I've worked occasionally for the majors. As a matter of fact, the last film I made in the United States was for Universal. There was a trade-off. As a matter of fact, the first film I made on a major studio lot was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And one of the things that impressed me was how good the crews were. The head cameraman and other key people were under contract to the studio, and the shooting went very, very smoothly and efficiently. However, in the casting, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was, of course, the massacre of the Bugs Moran gang by Al Capone. And for gangsters, I wanted to take classical actors. I wanted Orson Welles to play Al Capone and Jason Robards to play Bugs Moran. And I remember the head of the studio and a couple of his executives called me in and said, Roger, this is your first film on a major studio lot. We have to tell you, nobody can work with Orson Welles. He tries to take over the set. He does anything he wants. You don't need that problem. We suggest we move Jason Robards from Bugs Moran to Al Capone. We brought in a very good actor, Ralph Meeker, to play Bugs Moran. But I've always felt the film would have been better with Orson. As a matter of fact, Orson and Peter Bogdanovich and I were having dinner one night, and I told him the story, and he drew himself up and he says, I'm the easiest man in the world to work with. What did they say? I'm tough. He said, and then he said, I would have been a great Al Capone.
I'm talking about staying alive! Try getting it through your cement head that what Moran's pulled so far, that's for openers. He wants me. He wants me dead.
I had no problems in the actual shooting. It was things like casting and so forth. And I felt I would rather give up the efficiency of working at a major studio in order to have the complete control that I did as an independent.
I say it's time we put Capone and his bums out of business. For good.
I know, MGM, they were talking about me being the head of production at MGM, but the conversations went nowhere. The films I made from the beginning, and which I still make, are films I want to make personally, but also they are films that I guess, I use the word informed guess, as to what might be successful.
All right, now everybody reach for the night candle of the Lord. Reach!
This is Bloody Mama, the incredible saga of Ma Barker and her boys, the most bloodthirsty killers in the history of crime.
Specifically when I signed a contract at Columbia, other than the fact that I could take more time in rehearsals, I could set up more intricate shots. So using the extra time, I tried to use it efficiently, working more with the actors on the set and also working more efficiently. For instance, I used a boom for the first time on the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. I never had the money to rent a boom. They called me and said, "You've been making all these low-budget films. They've all been successful. Sign with us and you'll make bigger films and you will rise as a director." So when I signed with Columbia, I gave them two ideas. One was James Joyce's portrait of the artist as a young man. The other was Kafka's story in the penal colony. They were two different films, but I thought both could be important films, and I wanted to make them. They turned down both projects and started suggesting some B pictures. And I remember I went into Mike Frankovich's office, who was head of the studio, and I said, "Look, I took a cut in salary to come here to make bigger films. Now you're asking me to make the same films that I was making before, but you're giving me less money." And we parted on more or less amiable terms.
In this monstrous mausoleum of the living, you will witness fury far worse than a woman scorned. The fury of a dead woman's jealousy.
I didn't really make sequels as such, but if I had a successful film, I would make a new film that was not a sequel, but had some of the elements. For instance, Ron Howard played the lead in a car chase film called Eat My Dust. And I still remember he had a percentage of the profits. You open on a Friday night, and by Monday you really know where you're going. And I called Ron, and I said, "Ron, this picture is a big success. You're going to make a lot of money." He said, "I know that. I've been sitting here waiting for your call. I'll be right in your office because I know you'll want to make another film." So he came into the office, and he said, "Every time an actor has a big success, he asks for more money for the second film. I will make the second film for the same money, and I'll do another job for nothing." And I said, "What's the other job?" He said, "I'll direct the film." And I said, "Ron, you always look like a director to me." And he did Grand Theft Auto, which was one of our biggest successes. It started with Jaws. Vince Canby, the lead critic for the New York Times, said, "What is Jaws but a big-budget Roger Corman film?" He was right, but he missed one point. It was not only bigger, it was better. I looked at Jaws, and I thought the studios are starting to figure out what we've been doing. Not just me, but my contemporaries and friends making certain types of films. And the first film I ever produced, It Stalked the Ocean Floor, which we shot in 6 days, had a very similar plot to Jaws, but there was no comparison in the quality of the films. And then after that, out came Star Wars. And I thought, they really know what we're doing. This is what we've been doing, but they're doing them bigger and better, and we're in trouble. And I remember talking to Spielberg and Lucas, and they both said they saw my films and others when they were young, and they were at major studios, and they had the chance to make big-budget versions. As a result, the distribution of independent films has faded because the major studios have taken over to a large extent with superheroes and science fiction and one thing and another and horror, and they make them bigger and better, and that has taken us out of the market. So for an independent, the distribution is much worse than it ever was. On the other hand, the production is much better. We had the big Mitchell BNC cameras, a big lighting. For instance, the Brute light was so big it took 2 guys to move it around. Now you've got lightweight digital cameras, LED lights. Looking around here, well, we're talking right here. You've got all lightweight equipment, where if this interview were taking place 20 years ago, you'd had a Mitchell up there, you'd had a big sound man with a whole board over there controlling it. It's a whole different way of shooting. So shooting is easier, more efficient, and faster.
There was a voice on the radio while you were gone. There are others out there. There's a future out there for you two. You've got to go and find it.
Just pay attention to one of the guys who started with us, Jim Cameron. When he spends a lot of money, it's on the screen. When I happen to know how the financing went because he told me. He was going over budget on Titanic, and I think Fox had the domestic rights, and it may have been Warner's who had the foreign. It was split up because it was so expensive. And he needed more money, and both studios said they wouldn't give him more money. They felt he was so much over budget that this film was going to be a big loser. So he said, I will put up the extra money myself, but I want a bigger share of the profits. And they were delighted to give that to him, because I thought, he's bailing us out with his own money because we know this film was going to fail. It then became the biggest grossing film of all time. And the reason was the money was on the screen. I think it's partially obscene to spend a couple of $100 million on a motion picture. But at least with Jim, you see where the money went. What I would object to is if somebody else spends $200 million and it's a couple of guys walking around a room. That's a slight overstatement, but you understand what I mean.